Hello and welcome to Chapter 3, Organic Molecules and Cells. So now we go from our inorganic chemistry chapter, which was the foundation for a lot of things that we are going to discuss here in Chapter 3 when we look at the biological molecules of life. It is these molecules that are going to come together to form the fundamental unit of life, which is the cell, and that's where life truly begins because as far as everything with physiology and functioning and all that stuff, that is at the cellular level. So, like before, at any point during the lecture slides, you could pause the lecture and write down what's on the slides into your notebooks. I'll do a summary of what the slide is all about, and then later in class we'll do some practice and go over a bit of discussion about the importance of what was discussed in this lecture. So chapter 3. So in the beginning, when we look at organic chemistry versus inorganic chemistry, basically where did those two words come from? Well, in the 19th century, chemists thought organic molecules had this vital force. So think about what vital means. Your vital signs are signs to show whether you're alive or not. So they thought that organic molecules only came from living things. So in turn, organic meant organism, life. However, today we realize that organic molecules are not only from a vital force, but we could also synthesize them in labs. And we see this today because a lot of our world is carbon-based. Plastics, so on and so forth, they're all man-made molecules. So organic means a little bit more than organism, and inorganic from the 19th century means a little bit more than non-living. Today, organic means those molecules that are carbon-based and often include hydrogen, and inorganic is those non-carbon-based molecules. So all life forms, if you look at this picture here, you could see that we have here we have a cactus, here we have a crab, down here we have a bacterial cell. All these things contain these important biological molecules. Now, on focus here, we look at the different types of carbohydrates that are found as structural components of these different molecules. In here we have cellulose, which is a complex structural carbohydrate that is found in plant cells' walls. That can be present in the cactus here because it is a plant. In the crab here, we have the structural component of a carbohydrate called chitin. So chitin is the sugar there. And then down here in the bacterial cell, the prokaryotic cell organism, we have the structural sugar called peptidoglycan. And you've heard that in the last chapter or when we did classification. So peptidoglycan is the complex carbohydrate there that is a structural component. But beyond sugars, all these things also have fats and lipids. They have proteins. They do have nucleic acids like DNA and RNA. So these are the four main groups of biological molecules: carbohydrates, fats and lipids, amino acids and proteins, and the nucleic acids, which include DNA and RNA. So let's kind of regroup here then. Looking at organic versus organic, our last chapter was inorganic chemistry. And when we studied inorganic chemistry and inorganic molecules, we looked at compounds that usually contain positive and negative ions, such as ionic compounds like sodium chloride, potassium bromide, all those salt-forming compounds, where that metal is going to give up an electron to a nonmetal. But this isn't always the case. Even though it is usually ionic bonding, we do have covalently bonding ionic compounds. For example, water. Water is an inorganic molecule that is bonded covalently. So not all inorganic molecules are ionic bonding. The next, when we look at inorganic molecules, we often think of them as being smaller molecules as far as the number of atoms that they contain. So water, H2O, consists of 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom. Carbon dioxide gas, CO2, contains 1 carbon atom and 2 oxygen atoms. And of course, all these things refer to non-living matter. They're abiotic components of an ecosystem: air, water, the molecules and elements that make up soil. So these are all part of the inorganic molecules and those things that are abiotic. In this chapter, we are going to learn about organic molecules. And organic molecules always contain carbon. That's the central backbone to all these molecules. And these carbon atoms are going to bond to the other important, biologically important elements, those chin-up elements: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And because we're looking at the carbon atom, and these other atoms as well are all non-metals, we're always going to refer to them as covalently bonded atoms that form these organic molecules, because it's non-metals bonding with non-metals. And the special property of carbon allows carbon to build, because it is the central backbone of all these molecules can be built and become very large. The simplest of these would be methane, which is CH4. So you have that one simple hydrocarbon that has that central carbon atom, and then you have 4 hydrogen atoms surrounding it. That is the simplest. But you could have a molecule that contains hundreds of carbon atoms as its backbone, and attached to that are all these hydrogens and other elements. So organic molecules are usually associated with living things. In this chapter, because we're studying biology, the study of life, we are going to focus on the organic molecules that are focused on living things. Although, like I said before, there are organic molecules that are non-living, such as those organic molecules that are involved with plastics and so on and so forth. So the diversity of organic molecules makes life diverse. Organic chemistry is chemistry of the carbon atom. Compounds made of hydrogen and other elements are covalently bonded to carbon atoms. Organisms consist mainly of oxygen, hydrogen, carbon. Most of the oxygen and hydrogen are in the forms of water. So when we look at these organic molecules, again, we think of those chin-ups elements. Carbon is really the central focus here, and we're going to look at carbon in a minute. But hydrogen most frequently bonds with carbon, and then you throw in nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, and we'll see where they come into play as functional groups. So what's special about carbon? Carbon has unique bonding properties. Carbon can share electrons with as many as 4 other atoms, including itself. So if you look here, you see that carbon, these carbon atoms, carbon can bond 4 times. So here we have a central carbon atom. Here it's bonded to a hydrogen. Here it's bonded to a hydrogen. Here it's bonded to a hydrogen. And then here it's bonded to another carbon atom. And then this carbon atom here is bonded to 2 hydrogens, and it's bonded to the carbon atom to the left and to the carbon atom to the right. So what you see here is you have this straight chain. So this would be chains of carbon atoms with other molecules, not other molecules, I apologize, other elements that are attached to this molecule. So if you look, you can see that it's most frequently bonded with hydrogen there. Another important fact is carbon can double bond with itself. So there we have a carbon-carbon double bond in that straight chain form. Down here we have side branches, so we have a straight chain of carbon atoms, and we have a side branch. And then over here you can see a ring form of carbon atoms, where each of these little corners are in the ring here. That would be a carbon atom, and then from that you have other atoms connected to there. So consequently, it can form several different shapes. You could form chains, you could form rings, you could form side branches. A specific combination of bonded atoms that always react in the same way refers to a functional group. So often we refer to carbon and hydrogen. These are the bulk of the biologically important molecules or organic molecules, and we would call them hydrocarbons. But when you now start to throw in other elements, such as the nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, these hydrocarbons now have what we call functional groups. So when we look at functional groups, we'll see that those characteristic elements that make up that functional group, and then the rest of the hydrocarbon molecule will be labeled as the R group, which would be the remainder group. And here are the functional groups that we need to be associated with the biologically important molecules. Please do write this chart down in your notebook. So the first group is called the hydroxyl group. So a hydroxyl group is when you have that functional group, OH, coming off of a hydrocarbon. These are often found in alcohols, they're present in sugars, they're present in some amino acids. Then you have a carbonyl, and there are two types of carbonyls. You have those that are the aldehyde, and that's when you have a C double bonded to oxygen and a single bond to hydrogen at the terminal carbon. A ketone is when you have a center carbon and the hydrocarbon comes off of that center carbon, and that center carbon is double bonded to oxygen. Aldehydes are present in sugars. Ketones are also present in sugar. It's just the difference there is whether it's bonded to a terminal carbon or an intermediate carbon there. And because it's oxygen, we have polar molecules, all right? Up here, when the hydroxyl group gets added, oxygen's in there, so that makes it more polar. A carboxyl group, here we have it. Carboxyl is acidic. So you have the carboxyl as a terminal carbon, that's a C double bonded to oxygen, and then you have an OH down below. So it's often represented as COOH. Carboxylic acids are present in fatty acids and in amino acids. Now look at that word, acidic. So often when these are in solution, what makes them an acid is that they'll donate that hydrogen ion off there into solution. And you know, as the hydrogen ion concentration increases in solution, you have more of an acidic a solution there, so the pH will drop. The next group is the amino group. So you have your R group there, which would be the rest of the hydrocarbon. And at the end, you have nitrogen that's singly bonded to two different hydrogen atoms. And amino will be present in amino acids. And then you have the sulfhydryl group, which is R bonded to SH. These form disulfide bonds. They're present in some amino acids. And the last group is the phosphate group, and it's the remainder group with an oxygen attached to a phosphorus atom, and then you have a double bond to oxygen and then two OHs there. And these are present in nucleotides, and we'll look at the structure of a nucleotide a little bit later. So these are the major groups of the functional groups. We have the hydroxyl group, the carboxyl group, the amino group, the sulfhydryl group, and the phosphate group. And then the last group there would be that carbonyl group, and that carbonyl could be either labeled as an aldehyde or a ketone. I will go over this a little bit more in lecture when we get to that point. Isomerism. So we were looking at these organic molecules, and what we could see is isomerism. Let me quick pull out here so you can see this a little bit better. Isomers are molecules with identical molecular formulas, but they have different arrangement of atoms. And here we see an example. Here we have two sugars, glucose and fructose. Glucose and fructose both have the molecular formula. I'll quick go in here and put it in. They both have the molecular formula C6H12O6. And I'll come back to that. So both of these molecules have a molecular formula of C6H12O6. Glucose C6H12O6, fructose C6H12O6. But look at the arrangement of the atoms. And here's a good way where you can see the differences in the carbonyl. In glucose, you have that terminal carbon that's double bonded to an oxygen. What functional group would that be? It is a carbonyl, but more importantly, it's a, if you guessed aldehyde, you are correct. Fructose, you have C6H12O6, but instead of having the carbonyl that's an aldehyde, you have that carbon atom that's double bonded to oxygen right in an intermediate carbon there. That would be known as a ketone. So there you can see isomers or isomerism between sugar molecules. So isomers are organic molecules with identical molecular formulas, but the atoms of those molecules are arranged differently from one another. And that's where we'll stop this lecture today. We'll pick up again with what are the important biological molecules and how do they form. We'll talk about monomers and polymers. Have a great day.